On this edition of the NESN Red Sox podcast, we'll break down Boston's decision to stand pat at the trade deadline.
And we'll look ahead. Is this team good enough to turn things around, or did they really need to add another piece?
Swing and a miss, strike three, it's over. The Red Sox have won the World Championship.
The Red Sox walk it off. Mookie Betts. That ball is gone. The X-Man strikes. What a bullet by Devers.
I love to see the exit velocity on that one.
It's time to party.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the NESN Red Sox podcast. I'm Ricky Doyle, joined as always by Dakota Randall. Dakota,
How's it going?
let's unpack this trade deadline. Or
It's not
lack,
mu-
there,
no, it's
lack thereof.
There's not much to unpack.
Yeah. Well, across the league, there's certainly a last-minute barrage of transactions, but
we're not here to talk about that.
and maybe we'll get into that. But none of which included your Boston Red Sox,
No.
who stood pat. Not counting, obviously, the Andrew Cashner trade that they made a few weeks ago. This comes, I'm a little surprised by it. I thought at the very least, I knew they were up against it in terms of both with the financial flexibility due to that luxury tax threshold and the lack of prospect capital, I guess you could say, that they were in a tough spot going into this deadline. But I thought at the very least they'd have some sort of marginal bullpen upgrade. That not the case, though, just really doing nothing.
Yeah, no, it's listen, they're going to get killed from all angles, from media, by fans, and probably rightfully so. Listen, you're the defending World Series champions. I know they've had to this point they've still been, supremely underachieving team. But that said, you're still just 2 games out of the wild card. You have a roster almost entirely intact that won a World Series last year. You're just missing a couple bullpen arms. This is still I think it's a team still worth betting on, or most people would make that case. And they played their ass off last week, beating the Yankees 3 out of 4, Tampa Bay 2 out of 3. Sort of felt like a statement that the team made that said, all right, we know we've been bad to this point. Believe in us. Do something to help this team. We need a little bit of help. Let's go give this thing another shot. And for them not to do anything, we all sort of interpret it as the team, the front office giving up on the team, saying we don't believe in you enough to really invest. And I personally believe that, and I sort of understand it because as you know, I haven't really believed in the team all year, and I thought I wanted them to kind of sell, I was open to the idea of selling because I didn't believe in the team either, and I'm just surprised that they
It was just nothing.
I'm just surprised that they took the same approach. David Dombrowski told us a little while ago during his media availability. He said if we were better, if we were higher up in the standings, we were closer to first place, I would feel more apt to taking risks. And which is him telling you, listen, we just don't believe in the team enough to make a big move to improve the bullpen. Obviously, he said the asking prices were a big part too, but I'm just surprised that they looked at this thing and said, we really, we're not willing to double down on this team despite all the talent.
Yeah, see, that's why I wanted, we talked about this last
And if I'm a player,
week.
I'm pissed. Honestly, I'm pissed about it. Because
would you consider this to be a colossal failure?
Again, so I feel like anybody that wants to say it's a colossal failure and feels, they feel sort of like betrayed, or they feel that this is just, it's kind of just an egregious failure on the Red Sox part. I understand it and I believe it because, listen, World Series teams don't just grow on trees. Like, yeah, you haven't been good this year, but you still have a roster with a talent capable of making another run at it. And for them just to say we're not going to take that extra step that all the other teams are willing to take, I get why anybody would say it's a failure. I just personally have not believed in this team all season long, and which is why I didn't want to see them give up a Bobby Dalbec, a Tristan Cassis, a Durbin Feltman, a Jarren Duran, anybody like that for an Edwin Diaz. We can talk about those deals. You'd have to think about them at the time, but I didn't really want to see any of that because I didn't think anybody you were going to get was going to change this team in that much of a tangible way, because just getting a closer isn't going to fix the problems of this team. This team clearly has had a problem with the World Series hangover. We talked about it. They haven't been any sort of rhythm or groove all year. It just doesn't feel like a team that's going to be able to pull together and win a World Series. And I personally would not have bet on that as well. I'm just surprised that they looked at it the same way.
That's why I would have been all about a deal for Edwin Diaz or somebody like that, because I don't think you're not necessarily just betting on the team this year.
Right, I agree.
You're betting on next year's team, and in his case, beyond next year. So like that's the type of deal that I wanted them to make, because I think that has a sizable impact right now, and it also addresses a need that you're inevitably going to have to address at some point. Like this bullpen, he can, Dave Dombrowski can sit there and dress it up all he wants and give you how they want to fix Ryan Brazier.
Right,
and,
right. We'll get to that a bit.
And point to the numbers or what they hope it would be the numbers from Matt Barnes and Brandon Workman and this and that. But, I mean, at some point you got to have an influx of talent. They don't really have that coming up in the farm system. I mean, sure, Darwinson Hernandez has shown you some flashes of what he can do, but there's not like that one guy you can sort of point to. So I thought going out and getting an arm like Edwin Diaz, who's unlike anything you have in that bullpen, is a worthwhile move. I understand you're going to have to pay a premium price to get a guy like that, but you're going to have to do it at some point.
I do. I agree with you, and then I do with those types of moves. Now, Diaz is a special case because he was so good last year. He's been so bad this year that it's hard to look at it and say, to look at what he's put on this year and then say, well, we're going to part with premium assets, premium prospects, major league players, whatever it may be. I agree with you that a move like that would have helped them down the road the next 2-3 years. I agree, but for whatever reason, they looked at it as, and this team in and of itself isn't worth betting on, and he told you as much. Real quick, we should just get to the audio and let Dombrowski say it, because I thought his comments today were pretty interesting. So.
I think if we were closer to first place, I would have been more open-minded to some of the other things. Yeah, I think so. I think, not that we're, again, not trying to get our club better, but I think, and when I would say that, the club here needs to play better on a consistent basis. That's the way I look at it. We like our club. We've liked our club all year long. We're sitting, 10 games above 500. There's a lot of great things about it. We had a great week last week, but we still need to do it on a more consistent basis, and we hadn't reached that point to really, to me, give up a premium young player for a guy that was going to fill a certain role for us where we are right now. So that's the difference.
So you just heard it from him. I mean, he's telling you that, if they were close, and so my biggest problem with this is that it feels contradictory, because he's telling you here that if they were higher in the standings, they would have been more willing to take a risk, whether it be with the luxury tax or just prospects in general, to make a move to make this team better. All right, that's fine. I'll buy that. But what about last year when you stood pat too?
You've had
you were last year
2 trade deadlines in an offseason to address your biggest area of weekness, arguably your biggest area, because I do think the rotation this year has been just as much of a problem.
Right. I could even say more of a problem.
Right. But the bullpen, but obviously I think we can all agree that they need an upgrade there. And they've had, like I said, two trade deadlines now in an offseason, and all they've really had to show for it is Colton Brewer.
Right. Well, and what they're going to tell you is about last year is they're going to say, well, we did take the risk. We did find the hole. We went and got Ian Kinsler. And what I would say is, well, Ian Kinsler almost cost you the World Series with that error. And the guy who gave up, Ty Buttery, Buttery,
nice
either way,
right
was exactly what you need right now. So yeah, the one deal you can hang his hat on.
Another guy they let get away that got moved today. That
right.
Would be
and they just let him walk.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I watched Rowanus Elias enough to know that I don't believe in him.
But it's just like, not only it just magnifies the issue even more when not only you bringing in pieces, but guys that have left the organization.
Right.
It could help in those areas of need.
But to get back to the point you were making about Diaz, with, that's a type of deal that would have helped you year 2, year 3, because he was only making a little bit over $600,000, and he was under team control for 3 more years. And so to your point, they need to make. At some point, they need to just make a move that's going to address this problem, because unless they just really believe that Durbin Feldman's going to be ready next year, that Darwinson Hernandez is going to be either a closer or a set-up man, because everyone in the know sort of says that he's not going to end up being a starter, he's going to be a reliever. So unless they're looking at it and saying, it's just not, we just don't believe in it this year, we're going to wait, let these guys come up next year. But
that feels
that's
like what they did this year.
Right, and it's such a risk. Well, but this is different. I mean, these guys are prospects who have legitimate upside. This year they hung their hat on Ryan Brazier, Matt Barnes, Brandon Workman. But none of those guys have carried the same sort of upside as Hernandez, Feldman, that these guys that we've heard about. But the bigger problem is you can't just bank. With how important bullpen is now, with how short starters go into games, you need better bullpen arms. And for them to just hang it on, like you said, the average guys this year, and average is unfair, but the guys like Workman and Barnes, to hang it on those guys this year, and then seemingly going forth with the belief that, well, next year we're going to have prospects come up and prove themselves. At some point, you got to go do what they did with Craig Kimbrell and get an Edwin Diaz or a Will Smith or somebody, to solidify that in the back end of the bullpen.
I also wouldn't have minded if they had gone that route with a starter prior to adding Andrew Kashner. Like if they had gone out and their sizable move before the deadline was going out and get a controllable starter that is going to make an impact this year, going to make an impact next year, particularly if Rick Porcello walks or whatever. Like that's another issue that's going to come up with this offseason. So now they're going to have a couple of glaring needs that they got to address, and it's just now seemed like the time to do it. I mean, there is as many complaints as you might have about how this year's gone and all that. Like the window is still open. I mean, granted they're not going to win the division. I mean, Dave Dombrowski basically acknowledged as much.
Right.
But you have that opportunity to snag one of the wild card spots. I think I think Tampa Bay is sort of, they might start trending in the wrong direction a little bit here. Like Cleveland's been good, so maybe you and Cleveland battle it out in that one-game playoff. So I don't know. It's just I would expect more from the defending World Series champions.
Right, and I think they are in a weird spot because, I don't know how to frame this. Like it's tricky because you don't want to. If you're not going to go out and make a big deal or improve the team, it's sort of like, well, why don't then just sell, right? Because he told us that in so many words, that they don't believe in the team. So if that's the case, if you're not willing to double down or do something to improve the team to try and go repeat as World Series champions, just sell. And that doesn't mean sell Mookie Betts or JD Martinez, but he said we got a bunch of calls on our relievers, so I'm assuming that teams called and said, what will it take to get Brandon Workman? What will it take to get Matt Barnes? And I'm thinking, well, your farm system is so thin, why not make those moves? But on the other end, it's like, well, what message do you send to this team that just won 5 out of 7?
It's a fine line. It's a tightrope walk.
You're going to them and telling them, hey guys, we're selling. I know you've been trying to get back in this, and it's been kind of a struggle, and you're all busting your asses, but we're kind of selling. That's a tough message too. So I understand they're in a tricky spot there. What I don't like is after this happens, and we saw it last year too, this sort of disingenuous thing where they present it as, well, we believe in the guys that we got. They just got to pitch better. And we heard Dombrowski rattle off all the names in the bullpen and also saying, hey, we just need to fix Brazier.
I mean, he's not wrong.
No, he's not wrong, but it's like
there's a great deal of truth to that yes, this team has to get better, particularly its starters and in the bullpen. But to be sold that after an opportunity to go out and acquire help, it's just sort of a kick in the pants.
Well, and he's selling optimism on guys who we know what they are.
There's no reason to be optimistic about Ryan Brazier.
Right, and so we'll play that audio too, because I thought that was an interesting one too.
I think the problem for us in the bullpen, like a lot of people, is the depth. I mean, when you start getting to Barnes, I mean, the reality, you can't believe how many phone calls I got about our bullpen pieces. So people say you need bullpen. You cannot believe the number of clubs that called me about our bullpen guys. But when you start talking about Barnes, Workman, I know Evaldi hasn't quite done it, but we're still very confident that he's going to do it. And I know somebody will say Dombrowski said that, but that's how we do believe that he's going to be very good for us out there. The young left-handers have done very well. Hernandez is really coming along, and Taylor's done well. He had a bad night last night, but he's done very well for us. That's 5 guys out there. We're in a position where Walden's been real good in that role that he's had. Embry scuffled for a while, and he was coming back from that injury. He's throwing the ball better again. So you start going through them, and then we've got Johnson coming back, who's a different type pitcher, but we do need the long relief left-hander there. He's going to pitch for us probably on Saturday. And I know people have seen it, but we think we need to straighten out Ryan Brazier. We think he's a very good big league pitcher. He's got great stuff. He's down at AAA. He's pitching very well for us. So I just didn't feel like there's that one spot that really merited. Again, we could get better in a lot of different places, but the reality is that we're going to have to do it with the guys that are here.
Right. So there you heard it. So for them to, and we heard it last year when they didn't make a move at the deadline. Dombrowski said, well, we like Ryan Brazier. We think he's been really good for us. And at the time, we all said, how the hell can you possibly bet on a guy like that? And we were kind of wrong. I mean, he was good in the playoffs. Yeah. I think his role was a little overrated. I don't think he did nearly as much as people want to give him credit for. But regardless,
I was gonna say I don't think
it's like
What they sold you on last year, I don't think ended up being like the reasons that they won the World Series.
No, they won because of the starters
but now
roving
they can,
around. Right.
In retrospect, look at that and sort of cover up their lack of maneuvering. This
Right.
time around.
They're saying they're
Like,
trying
we
to say we
did
can do it
everything
again.
right last year, and it's like, well,
Well, you also got Nathan Eovaldi, who made a huge difference. You didn't do that this year.
right.
You know.
I mean,
and that's why we shouldn't say they stood pat last year because they got Nathan Eovaldi, but they got him as a starter.
And
They
Steve
didn't.
Pearce, but-
Right, and Steve Pearce. But as far as helping the bullpen, because the bullpen's been the main issue the last 2 years, seemingly anyway. They got Nathan Eovaldi, so obviously that's a big feather in Dombrowski's cap. We can debate whether or not it was luck or not. But for 2 years in a row, they basically sold us that, don't worry, we have Ryan Brazier. It's just disingenuous because they don't believe that.
Yeah.
And it's annoying when you invest yourself in the team and you follow the team, and just to get that thing that just isn't real is frustrating.
So I thought there were the ways they could have gone. You make the splashy move, and go out and even if you're aiming high enough, blow past that luxury tax threshold.
And he said they were willing to do it.
So if you're willing to do that and you go out and you make a move like a big move, you grab impact players, one or more, and you blow past that, that sends them ideally a guy who's controllable beyond this season. That's fine. I also thought use that room that you did have to make at least a marginal upgrade.
Right.
Daniel Hudson was the name that was tossed around. Like, I don't know, you're sort of adding to a collection of crap, I guess, but
right.
you still it sends a message that you're rewarding the guys for the recent stretch that they're on, and you're making an effort to improve that area. The idea of just standing pat never made sense, and the idea of blowing past that luxury threshold for a guy who's only going to help you this season didn't make sense.
Well, and it gets back to what we said before. They're contradicting themselves because he just said if we were higher up in the stand, he said that the ownership and the front office has never, if he wanted to make a deal, if he went to them and said, well, we're going to go over the luxury tax threshold, but I think this is going to make us better and this is a difference maker. He said he doesn't believe they'd ever stop him from making a deal, that they're not so afraid of going over the luxury tax. It's something they consider. It's a risk. So then you figure out what's the risk, what's the reward, is it worth taking? And he told you that, well, we didn't think it was worth taking this year because we weren't higher up in the standings. It's a little too risky. Is the team really worth it? Fine. But then the same thing was last year. They didn't want to go over the threshold, or they didn't want to go so far over it, so they just went barely over. And it's like, well, that team, if you ever had a team worth betting on, it was a team that won the most, got the most wins in team history. So it's like, which one is it? And again, it's a tough pill to swallow especially if you're a good Red Sox fan and an optimistic Red Sox fan. See, I'm just cynical and I'm negative. So I looked at it and said, I don't believe in this team. I want them to sell. Trade Mookie Betts and JD Martinez, but I'm the outlier. I'm probably wrong in all of that.
It's interesting too if they, I mean, I don't know. Do you think they would have approached this any differently had they won the final two games going into the trade deadline? Like if they're staring at a sweep of the Yankees on Sunday night, and that game gets away from them, and then obviously the Tuesday night debacle against the Rays, in which you saw the two areas of weakness, the rotation and the bullpen, come up short again. And do you think that those two instances, you sort of take a step back and you're like, all right, for all the good that we've had over the past week and a half, and we had that 3-game stretch which we just mashed against the Yankees, now we're again seeing the pitfalls of this roster, and it's not worth investing.
Yes,
so because I think if you win those 2 games and you're staring at the sweep of the Yankees and the however many game winning streak, you had won the series against the Rays last week, I think the conversation's a little bit different.
Yeah,
I think you might be a little bit more willing. But now after those 2 losses, it's like, we take a couple steps forward and then we take a couple steps back, and that's sort of just been the whole theme of this season.
I agree, and that's ultimately why I don't really believe in the team, is because it's felt like that all season long, and typically that doesn't just turn around. But the one thing where I do sort of believe Dombrowski and the team is that they said the prices were too high, and I believe it. I mean, that's what happens at the trade deadline. These teams ask, for ridiculous returns on relievers because everybody wants relief pitching at the deadline. And listen, if you wanted to get Edwin Diaz or Iglesias from Cincinnati or Will Smith from San Francisco, and those teams come at you and say, well, we want Tristan Casas, your top prospect. We want Darwinton Hernandez. We want Bobby Delbeck alone, sure, but if they're really coming at you wanting your top prospects, and that's kind of the names, the kind of players we saw thrown around at the deadline, I I believe them when they say we just didn't feel comfortable doing that because the state of the system or the status of the system it's improved over the last 2 years, but it's still one of the worst farm systems in baseball.
Right.
And so just to keep depleting it for what gain? To improve a team that you don't believe in? Again, I would have done the Diaz thing or something like that because of the long-term benefit.
Well,
but
that's the thing.
they were in a
It's
weird
like,
spot.
I feel
in
like
their defense.
you gonna get to the offseason and maybe you see a deal like that. Like maybe they then decide, okay, now's the time, and they get Edwin Diaz or Will Smith. He's a free agent.
Prices do go down in the wintertime. Absolutely.
But how much is my question? Like, I mean, it's impossible for us to sit here and know, but I would pay a little bit extra for having a guy for this stretch run in addition to the 1, 2, 3 years of control down the road.
That's a good point, and I agree with that.
I don't know if anything, Edwin Diaz might just reestablish some of his value that he's lost this season and this, because it's been a mess for him. So it just seemed like an opportunity that was there for them. Him being on a lower salary obviously could have kept them with underneath that luxury tax threshold. But also, I wouldn't have been against shaking up the major league roster a little bit.
Right. Well, we saw that. One of the rumors was that Buster Olney, and I don't think this wasn't saying that the Red Sox were considering dealing these guys,
it was
but it was a speculation. He thought the Mets might ask for Andrew Benintendi or Jackie Bradley Jr. and maybe then a package of prospects. So whether it's those guys or not, I mean, how did you feel about moving those kind of guys?
So somebody like Bradley, if they were to move him, that in a deal that also helps this year's team, that.
The Bradley one, I feel is a no-brainer. I feel like anybody would have done that.
Consider the Mets trade for Marcus Stroman, or consider the Reds getting Trevor Bauer. We've seen these weird trades at this year's deadline that we're sort of restructuring rather than rebuilding. So if the Red Sox had decided we're not necessarily in sell mode, but we're going to sell off a piece that we don't think we're going to retain beyond next season, we're also going to add a piece that will be here next season but help us now. So if you were subtracting a Jackie Bradley Jr. but you were addressing your bullpen, I feel like that that has the potential to be a net positive.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean? You're taking away from an area of strength, trading off a guy who you don't think you have a chance to retain beyond next season, but you're addressing the need right now, and also having the guy for next year. So
yeah, and that one comes down to whether what you think of Jackie Bradley Jr. as a player, and I think we kind of agree on that one. Where
and it's not even just I'm not even saying just Bradley, but that sort of mindset of I'm willing to take from the major league roster and sort of move parts around, because I think there is an element of staleness to this team. I think we talked about it as far back as spring training, and that's really when they got off to the slow start. And he said it felt like they were sort of, the unwillingness to turn the page. I mean, they even admitted as much, that they weren't necessarily looking to turn the page or looking to start a new chapter or whatever that dumb cliche that we were fed. And I didn't really like that approach, and it's gotten to a point where it feels a little stale. So I would have liked to have seen just some sort of shakeup, whether it's even, like I said, you could trade one piece that, like a Bradley, and bring in a reliever, and how you feel about that, whatever. But it's some sort of change. I just think change in some element could have helped them.
Well, and I think John Henry a couple weeks ago spoke to that and said, especially with, I think it was kind of framed around Steve Pearce, because Steve Pearce hasn't offered much this season. He said, maybe bringing back everybody from that won the World Series isn't the best approach. I think it feels kind of like a no-brainer. I think I agree to you. I agree with what you said. You need to shake it up sometimes. You don't want, and the Red Sox, we've seen it now. When they win a World Series, there's a big, the next season is always kind of a disappointment, whereas other teams are able to maintain it. And the question is why. And I think part of it is when teams win around here, fans and the ownership fall in love with players, sometimes irrationally so, and it's easy to understand why. They take you on these big runs in October, and you fall in love with Steve Pearce and Nathan Eovaldi and all this stuff, and then then you go to the offseason, you overpay him, you bring back Steve Pearce, and it's fine and everything, and I get it, but to your point, I think those are the kind of guys where you say, thanks, we appreciate it, but we're going to move on, go in a different direction, and bring in someone new with some different energy, shake it up a little bit, because like you said, it grows it doesn't just grow stale for the fans and for everybody sort of following it. I think it grows stale within the clubhouse. You get used to the same guys. It's not the same energy. Shake it up a little bit. I think you saw that in May when Mike Chavis first came up. I mean, you could see it. A young guy came up. He played really well, and the team sort of rode that and went on a hot streak there. And I think it was because, you had something new, and it sort of breathed life into him.
You got to find the next Nate Eovaldi and the next
Right.
Steve Pearce, and not necessarily pay the one for their past performance.
Yeah. But I also, we should get to the Red Sox. Did not have a busy deadline. Of course, they didn't do anything, but there were a lot of trades out there. And so while the Red Sox were doing nothing, the Astros were building an absolute wagon.
Well, I think that's sort of, that highlights the problem too when you do look across the league and you see that. Although I will say, for as disappointing as justifiable as it is to be disappointed by the Red Sox lack of maneuvering, if you're a Yankees fan right now,
I think you're more.
I would be pissed.
You're more upset. I mean, I don't even know the name of the guy they got. It's some Garcia left-handed pitcher, like a minor league guy, basically. Nothing. And so that's tough if you're a Yankees fan.
Because
just because their starting pitching is.
I will say the Yankees. It's easier to sell if you're the Yankees, not sell pieces, but sell the idea of standing pat because they do have a lot of guys that are coming back or might come back.
Right.
Like if you want to point to Luis Severino and Dellin Betances, Giancarlo Stanton, Gary Sanchez, like they've had a lot of injuries, so you can kind of hang your hat on well, at least we got these reinforcements on the way.
Right.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that sentiment because I do think that they're in a position. One, you're just the Yankees, but you have the prospect capital. Like they've continued to hang on to
It's been so
Clint
long for them
Frazier,
too.
Go out and it's pretty clear you need a starter. And
that's the only thing you need.
That's the only thing you need. And what do? You sit there, you don't get that starter, and you look across the league, and the Astros had one of the best starters in baseball.
Right.
Like that is just the juxtaposition of those two things is a huge kick in the teeth.
Yeah, while the Red Sox and the Yankees are doing nothing at the deadline, right at the end, the Astros are adding Zach Greinke, Aaron Sanchez from the Blue Jays, Joe Biagini. They got somebody else. I don't know. I'm forgetting. I think a couple weeks ago, but they've built an absolute powerhouse, and they have to be the favorites.
And they did so without giving up their two best prospects.
Yeah, they didn't give up Tucker, right?
Willie,
so
that speaks to the importance of building a good farm system.
Right. I know, and the Yankees have the pieces to do it, and especially in New York where they haven't won since was it 09, 10? Either way, it's been that long, and that's. For the Yankees, that's an eternity, and with how they've come up short the last couple of years, they've watched the Red Sox win. This is the best team they've had in a while, and they've been dominating all season long. And to be they really are just one starter away,
right.
And to not do anything.
And you look at the pieces that the Mets gave up to get Marcus Stroman. Like the Yankees can't top that deal.
Well, and you wonder if the price was higher for them because they're in the division. But I agree, in theory, yes. Like. There had to be a deal out there for them.
Yeah.
I mean, even Andrew Kashner, like something. They didn't add any starter, and we just saw how bad their starting pitching is in the series with the Red Sox. I mean, it's a legitimate. It could. I mean, I guess you could make the case that if they just get 3 or 4 innings from their starters in the playoffs, they've got such a good bullpen that they'll be able to figure it out. But that's not sustainable.
Yeah, I saw somebody tweet earlier that the Yankees are going to have the best bullpen ever. Holding deficits to what it is.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like they're going to fall behind by 3 or 4 runs, and the bullpen's going to do a bang-up job.
Yeah, they're going to set to set a record for holds.
So I don't know. That's a.
And that was a big deal. What else is there worth noting? Nicholas Castellanos went to the Cubs. It's kind of a cool trade. I like him as a player.
The Trevor Bauer trade.
Was
pretty
crazy.
fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's a great trade for the Indians.
I touched on it earlier that I just found interesting about this whole deadline in general was just a guy like Trevor Bauer getting traded to Cincinnati, who they're kind of on a fringe. They're still in contention a little bit. I think they're like 6.5 back.
It's been a long time since they've made any sort of noise.
But they're doing this with an eye towards 2020.
Right.
Which would be the final year of Bauer's contract. The Mets, they're another team. They're out of playoff contention, but they go and get Marcus Stroman with an eye towards 2020, also a free agent after next season. So, these teams don't want to commit to a rebuild, but rather they're going with, this restructure with an eye towards just one season from now.
Which is weird because they also traded Scooter Gennett. So it's you traded – I mean, I get if you're trading your top prospect for Trevor Bauer because you need starting pitching, and they have a team who could be a wild card team next year. You could see that, and I think maybe there's some – there's some motivation there to win one, to try and get into the playoffs for Joey Votto.
But
Something
what
which I get.
I'm
but,
anxious to see if this becomes a trend with teams doing more deals like that.
Right.
Where the Indians
Well, it's what
essentially
the Mets did with Stroman.
the Indians essentially did with what I suggest that the Red Sox could have done, which is they took a piece that they didn't think they were going to keep beyond next season, Trevor Bauer, and traded him to address needs in the roster right now, and getting Yasiel Puig, Franmil Reyes. They got a couple other people. Logan Allen was in that deal as well.
back-end starter.
So they got pieces. They realized we're in contention. They're basically in the same exact spot as the Red Sox.
Right.
And they leveraged one of their strengths to go out and address their weakness. So, if the Red Sox had made a move like that, granted the Red Sox don't have a Trevor Bauer to trade.
Right.
But,
they do position on
the position side.
Again,
so had they made a move like
yeah.
that, I think that would have been better than standing pat.
Right.
But I think it is, to get back to the original point about, it'll be interesting to see if this sort of becomes a trend. It's we're seeing now that rentals are just, it's non-existent. The market for a rental is so thin now.
And that was just such a fascinating trade. For people that haven't had a chance to really look at it yet, essentially what happened was, the Indians sent their ace to the Reds. The Reds sent their top prospect to the Padres, and the Padres sent Franmil Reyes, a guy who in his second year has 27 homers, but is seen basically as a DH. They don't think there's a position for him. So they sent him and Logan Allen, former Red Sox pitcher, a guy who went out in the Craig Kimbrell deal. They sent those two to the Indians.
Yeah.
And then the Indians also got Yasiel Puig. A pretty fascinating trade, because you could look at a couple of them you look at, you're like, well, what are the Padres kind of thinking?
The Padres,
they're getting a potential star prospect in Trammell, and they're looking at us. Well, we gave up a DH and a number 5 starter for a guy who could be a stud.
They're more or
you
less
can make the argument.
consolidating their upside.
Right.
They're taking several players that they're a little more of a known quantity.
Right.
Reyes more so than Allen, but taking those guys and just sort of consolidating it into one prospect who you think could be a star down the road.
Right.
So it's just
so they do
it's
that.
an interesting dance.
Yeah, they make that, which I think is a good. You can make the case it's a good strategy. The Reds get an ace, like you said, for next season, and the Indians get enough pieces to keep their window open while also getting high value for a guy that they didn't think they were going to re-sign. So it's a weird example of a three-way trade that I think everyone can be satisfied with where they came out.
But a lot of these deals I look at, and it's teams are being forced to get creative,
right?
Because there's such a premium on high-level prospects now that
right.
Unless you're like the Astros and you have this incredible surplus of prospects, and then you could deal away, they kept their top 2 prospects, but then dealt away 4 of the next
right.
4 prospects, whatever. Unless you're in the enviable position of being able to do that and sort of not have your farm system take a hit, you're going to see teams just so reluctant to part with their prospects that they have to get creative in order to land impact players. And that's why you're going to see, I think, a lot of deals like that Bauer trade, or
right.
like the Stroman trade, where a team who sort of comes out of nowhere in the traditional sense, but has this vision of all right, well, maybe we're going to contend next year. So whether it's right, I don't know, because I still look at how the Astros got to where they were, and that was they bottomed out. They bottomed out. They built an incredible farm system.
They tanked hard. Yeah.
They tanked hard, which, look, no fan base wants to go through that. No organization wants to go through that. But look where they're at now. A perennial powerhouse that, in my opinion, is so far and away the class of the AL now.
Right, but it's the playoffs. Once you get into the playoffs, anything can happen, and provided you have the pieces, which is why I think there's just frustration among the Red Sox fans and probably their players that just give us the pieces and we'll figure this thing out. Anything can happen when you get in the playoffs. The Cardinals won the World Series one time, winning 84 games or something. Anything can happen, and as good as the Astros are, you don't know what can happen. They can get in there, the Yankees could beat them in the playoffs, and then suddenly you're up against the Yankees who you feel comfortable against. So it's the Astros are great, but give yourself a chance.
I do want to say one thing positive about the Red Sox, though, is that I did feel this weekend, like I said, up until obviously the setback that they had Sunday and then Tuesday in the series opener against the Rays. But to me, on watching them on Saturday, I felt for the first time all season like they had started to establish an identity a little bit.
Yeah.
This is a team that we know their flaws, but are they going to be fatal flaws? Like, could this team theoretically mash its way into the postseason, and then once you get there, make a little noise? Like, because their offense it's legit.
Well, and so I heard people sort of debate about this the other day, that which offense is better, last year's offense or this year's offense? And I thought about it, and I would take this year's offense, primarily because of what you're getting out of Christian Vasquez.
Because
you're not what you're getting.
It's more spread out this year.
It's deeper.
Far more spread out.
It's deeper, and you're getting slightly down seasons from Mookie Betts and JD Martinez, but they're not liabilities. They're still all-star caliber, and so you have that plus what you're getting: Bogarts, Devers, Christian Vasquez. I mean, this offense is legit, like you said. But my thing is
top four. Even it's just like, eesh.
I just think it's the bullpen is such a weakness, and I think the starting rotation has been such a weakness for them that I don't see the starting rotation turning it around. I mean, this is a conversation probably for the next podcast, but the further we get into the season, I don't think there's any real hope for Chris Sale turning it around. It's either this is the new Chris Sale, which is horrifying if you're the Red Sox who just signed him, or it's a transition year. And it's just, I don't see a scenario where he gets in the playoffs and suddenly is 7 innings lights out Chris Sale.
Yeah.
David Price, I think we all trust David Price more than we ever have before, but at the end of the day, he still is basically giving you just 5 innings. And we know Eduardo Rodriguez, he's had a great year.
He's hit a rough patch, too. It's been a good year for the most part. But
we don't trust Rick Porcello. Eduardo Rodriguez basically is a 5-inning pitcher. And so that plus your bullpen, how thin it is, I just don't see any way it really pans out for them. Maybe if you went and got a reliever, but it's just, it is frustrating because of how good the offense is. And like you said, over the week, the past week, you just watch them and said, all right, I think they finally have clicked on offense, and they're legit. I mean,
so that's my thing is if you're somebody in that lineup, if you're Xander Bogaerts and Mookie Betts, who's been, for the relative down season he's having, is really coming around lately. Like, and you look at the shortcomings on the pitching side. I mean, you want that addressed.
Like, you're pissed.
It's a little bit. It's deflating a little bit.
Yeah,
because say you're not addressing that issue. I mean, organizationally, I think your hope is that you send a message that, hey, we believe in this group as a whole, collectively, like all 25 guys, and that it's also sort of a message to the pitching staff, like, all right, your time's now. It's time to step up. But if I'm a guy who's swinging the bat well and
like
contributing
Xander
to
Bogaerts, who took a pay cut
I want
too.
you to go out and get a pitcher who's going to perform above what they've had to this point.
Well, like if I'm Xander Bogaerts, a guy who just took a pay cut and wants to stay here, and I'm putting up the best season of my career, I'm like, well, and really the whole offense, it's like all season long we've had to basically score 5 runs a game. Like whether it be the starters or the relievers, we've had to go in every game thinking we're going to have to score 5 or 6 runs, and I think that's been one of the biggest problems all season. It's just the mindset. The team's never felt comfortable because they've gone into every game saying, what the hell's going to happen tonight? And it's like, well, you've put us in the spot where we've had to fight every night and score 5 or 6 runs, and you didn't address it at the deadline. After we just won your World Series. I mean, that's got to be.
It's tough.
I mean, they're going to say all the right things. They're going to say, well, we believe in the guys in this clubhouse, and it's up to us to play better. And they're not wrong, but inside they definitely there has to be disappointment in there.
Any other big takeaways from the trade deadline, either Red Sox perspective or league as a whole? Some names that were floated around prior that ended up staying put. I mean, Zach Wheeler was one, Madison Bumgarner, obviously, Noah Syndergaard, Felipe Vasquez in Pittsburgh being held. So
I just think prices were too high, and a lot of teams like the Red Sox weren't willing to meet those. And I think some of those teams just didn't want to go all in on selling. I think the Mets, the fact that they went out and got Stroman made you think, well, are they really going to sell too? Because that doesn't make much sense. So I think they're kind of giving up on. They're obviously giving up on this year and thinking we have pieces here.
If you're the Mets and you don't re-sign Zach Wheeler, that's a questionable decision.
Well, you're right. You're right. So I mean, if you're a Mets fan, you have to be annoyed.
So if you don't re-sign Zach Wheeler and you trade Noah Syndergaard, and what direction are you going then?
Yeah. It's a directionless franchise. It has been for as long as we can remember.
Which is why I think I still would err on the side of the Astros blueprint of bottoming out for a little bit and replenishing that way.
It's working out.
And picking your spots. I think that's sort of what we're seeing with the Padres right now too.
Yeah.
They're making slight noise this year, but I think you're going to look next year and in 2021, and the Padres are going to be right up there as well.
Yeah, I agree. For the Red Sox, I think, it'll be interesting to see going forward between now and into the first week of September. To see how they perform, but really, I mean, you're going to see some guys come up here. I think that, they they might believe in that they think can do the job. I mean, you got Tanner Houck, who has been sort of up and down in Pawtucket, but he's a first-round pick from 2017, who occasionally has been lights out down there. We've talked to the guys at Sox Prospects about him. He seemed to turn a corner. He moved to the bullpen about a month ago. With some mixed results, when he's been good, he's been really good and really nasty. He's got a vicious slider. When he's been off, he's kind of got hit around a little bit, but I mean, I think you're going to see him come up. I think Lakins and Shawayron are going to come up. Let's see if they've sort of figured it out after going down to Pawtucket. I think you're going to see more of a role for Darwinton Hernandez, especially if he keeps performing well. And then with Sam Travis playing well and getting more time at first base, especially if they're just going to kind of write off Steve Pearce for this season. We saw tonight, I think Bobby Delbeck is playing first base in Portland. I mean, that's an interesting development.
Yeah.
I think he's going to get a lot more time at first base. We'll see. Maybe he's a September call-up. Who knows? I just think there's a lot of guys in the minors that are, it's going to be interesting to see, what they do down the stretch here.
It always feels like right around August 1st is when you start to see some of that more aggressive movement in the minors. Like with Dahlbeck playing first base being a classic example. Like maybe he gets a few weeks exposure there, and next thing you know, he's in Boston for September. So
and let's see if Ryan Brazier figures it out too.
Well,
so
they're hanging their hat on that a little bit.
I know.
I mean, that's.
Yeah. And maybe, who knows? I mean, crazier things have happened. Maybe he comes up in September. He's figured it out in Pawtucket. Who knows? But I think it's going to be really interesting. You got about 5 or 6 players there that they're sort of banking on, and even if they're not banking on, I just think they're interesting to follow. Houck, to me, is the one I'm curious to watch the most because, it's a first-round pick who, he's been kind of around 4th or 5th ranked prospect in the system, and so let's see what he's got. He's in Pawtucket now. Let's check it out.
So I guess, as a whole, I would summarize my stance on the Red Sox as understandable because I'm not totally surprised, but underwhelming.
Well, I mean, I think it's hugely disappointing because ultimately.
Underwhelming is putting it lightly.
Yeah,
it's disappointing.
It's hugely disappointing.
It's very disappointing.
For whether it's disappointing simply because they elected to, basically give up on this team or not bet on them and not give them the pieces they need to go make another run at a World Series. That in and of itself is disappointing. But beyond that, it's also a symptom of a larger issue where this is the follow-up to your World Series season. The Red Sox have put themselves in this position where they might not be worth betting on. It's just been. To follow up after what happened last October, you've gotten a down season. You got to the deadline. You made no big moves to get better. It's kind of.
It's like you're in a hand of poker, and your cards are good enough that you want to stay in the hand and see a few more cards after the flop.
Yeah.
But you're playing against the chip leader who's just sort of bullying you around. The chip leader being the Astros, and you would have thought the Yankees, but.
It's just hugely disappointing because you would have liked to have seen after World Series, you sort of establish yourself as this isn't a one-off like it was in 13. We're here to stay. We're going to come back and be just as good next season. And you go to the deadline, you add pieces like the Astros did or like other teams do, and it's just, it's just kind of another point in the season that just, it's got to be infuriating if you're a Red Sox fan.
We'll see. Maybe
and puzzling because there's so much talent on the team that it's just.
It's the thing. I mean, we check in again in a week or whatever. Things could change between now and then because they're still in the midst of that very important stretch. I mean, you got the continuing on with the Rays here, and then they got the Yankees for a 4-game set. So.
And this could get ugly. I mean, can you imagine if they go into New York in a few days and the bullpen blows a couple games?
Yeah.
It
could get very ugly.
It's going to get ugly.
Very ugly very quick.
Thing is, that scenario it probably is going to happen.
So
it's more likely than not. So brace yourselves for that one.
It's one thing if you're in that clubhouse or whatever, you can't put a lot of stock into what happened or what didn't happen at the trade deadline because you still got crap to do.
Yeah. So we'll see. Like you said, going forward, but it's a weird day for the Red Sox.
Very weird. All right. Well, let's get out of here.
Sounds good.
We'll catch up next week, I suppose.
Yeah. See you next week.
All hands on deck.
And we have 2 more games with the Rays and 4 with the Yankees. So it'll be an interesting conversation next week to see where this team is. So.
All right, we're gonna get out of here. He's Dakota Randall. I'm Ricky Doyle. It's been the Nets and Red Sox podcast. See you later, everyone.